Okay.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. We are excited and thankful for you guys joining us today for our webinar, where we'll be talking about change management strategies for successful WMS implementation. Before we get started, I do want to do a quick disclosure and remind everyone that the information discussed in this session represents the views of the individuals and does not constitute for legal advice or the views of Alpine. So you should consult with your organization's leadership and legal counsel as needed for your specific situations. Awesome. With that quick introduction, I will be your moderator today. My name is Brenda Stoltz, and I'm one of the senior managing directors here at Alpine Supply Chain Solutions. I co-lead what we call our systems practice, and my team does a lot of these WMS implementations and support. So excited to have two members today talking to you about a recent experience. So if you go to the next slide, please. Your presenters today will be Viridiana Luna and Natalie Landgraf. Excited for them to share their expertise. Viridiana is an executive leader with over 10 years of experience in leadership and team development. And her expertise really includes guiding and developing teams through engagement, building authentic connections, and creating sustainable results. For the past couple of years, she's really helped Alpine with our organizational development efforts and helping our clients with any kind of change, specifically WMS or LMS implementations, and really helping them establish and execute a detailed change management plan. And then secondly, she's joined by Natalie Landgraf. Natalie is a flexible, independent implementation project consultant at Alpine with experience in several WMS platforms at this point. And she was actually recognized as a 2024 Women in Supply Chain winner by Food and Logistics last year. So excited for them to share some of their knowledge and expertise with you guys today. With that, today we'll be discussing a couple of things. We're going to do a quick WMS overview. We are going to talk high level at Alpine's role in deliverables as it relates to training and change management. We'll talk about the power of OCM tools, our framework, and then real life application. We're excited to talk to you guys about one specific project and client where we use some of these OCM methodology and how we were able to ensure a successful go live and then sustainable change for this client. We'll talk about those results. And then also share a little bit about their experience. Awesome.
All right, I'll take it from here. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. This is Natalie. So first off, School Specialty is the client we're going to be talking about today, and they're a leading provider of educational products and services, serving over 100,000 schools across North America. So it's back to school season. So if you got your school supplies on time this year, there's a good chance that it was from School Specialty. And School Specialty chose to implement Blue Yonder WMS in their facilities with a phased approach, meaning that they implemented the WMS one site at a time. This allowed them to stabilize the system, absorb workload at other sites if needed, and apply lessons learned before working on the next site's rollout. And there were several locations. They're actually still going through the rollout, but the initial location involved School Specialty and a software integrator for Blue Yonder. And they used a common approach of design, testing, training, and go live with an added bonus of a mock go live event. The first site experienced challenges at go live due to various factors, but these could all be summarized by a lack of experience in WMS implementations and a lack of change management. So the go live at that first site made it clear that they needed additional support for future sites, and then we were engaged at Alpine at that point to support site 2. The second site, which is the focus of our webinar today, came with distinct risks to consider. It was the highest volume site in School Specialties network with more associates as well, meaning that any gaps in preparation would be magnified at go live. They also had multiple aspects to their operation, which was similar to the first site, but still a complexity to consider, such as distribution, fulfillment, kitting, and having multiple shifts. And then lastly, this is also site 2. So the operations team had a tough job to compare their current practices to the way that site 1 decided to operate in this new WMS environment. So they had to decide when to standardize to align with what site 1 was doing and when to retain their own local ways of working. So with that context, let's take a look at our roles and deliverables that we provided to support that second site. Considering the risks I just outlined, we offered support in the areas of design, testing, end user training, and change management. In design, we attended the sessions alongside school specialties so we could gather information about changes in process ahead of time. So details like whether a process would be the same or different from Site 1 affected how we wrote documentation and affected how we prepped the support team at Go Live as well, since many of them were from Site 1. We also created test plans and executed user acceptance testing to ensure that the list of scenarios were thorough, make sure that the testers understood the scenarios and what constituted a passed or a failed test, and ensured that issues were reported and prioritized accurately. Change management in this period was most exemplified by the fact that there were a core team of warehouse associates that were identified to do the testing, which they referred to as the Tiger team. And in fact, that Tiger team had been involved in the project since the design sessions that I mentioned earlier. Then we played a similar role in training end users by making detailed plans, using the documentation that we wrote previously, and overseeing the trainers as they executed it. But one unique aspect here is that projects without OCM typically don't have additional trainer readiness assessments. We always ensure that trainers have the system knowledge that they need to be trainers for Go Live, but when OCM is in scope, we add detailed assessments on the trainer's actual soft skills, and we plan events specifically aimed at improving those skills so they're better overall trainers. And then lastly, we have the change management portion of our role in the second implementation. Of course, as I mentioned, the OCM activities affect all of our other deliverables, but the specific activities in scope for change management to achieve all of that were leadership and stakeholder alignment and engagement, which is essentially making sure the right people were involved and understood the implementation at each phase of it, as well as a specific change management plan, which outlined the events that would need to take place about change, such as morning stand-up meetings, a communication plan that explained when, where, how the leaders would talk about change with their associates, and then ensuring the training incorporated all the change discussions that led up to it. And then lastly, conducting lessons learned after each of the major project milestones, so school specialty could take those lessons for the next event or even the next site that would be going live with Blue Yonder. So in the next few slides, Vidi's going to educate you all a little bit more on some OCM specifics.
I'm sorry, Vid, before you jump in, I'm killing at my moderator task here. So a couple of housekeeping items. We do like for these sessions to be a little conversational. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to use either the chat or the Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on those, and then I can ask those questions for you guys.
Thanks, Brenda. Yeah, so Natalie just did an amazing job walking us through really exemplifying how change was applied to the school specialty project, right? But now I'm going to take a couple steps back and walk us more through the holistic approach of change management, right? So I think nowadays when you think of change management, and if you compare that to maybe 10 years ago in supply chain, change management wasn't really a huge focus, right? And now I think what's neat to see is that really change management plays a role in 4 different areas, right? When organizations consider change management, it either has to do with there's a change in leadership organization in terms of how they're structured, there's a shift in the team structure, there's a new technology that an organization is implementing, a new form of AI technology, or in this case, a WMS system. Or it could also be an adoption of a new business model that's going to impact the way that end users, associates, and leaders go about doing their daily tasks. And that's when we really hone into that roles and responsibility change, right? So what do all these 4 things have in common? Really, it hones down to change has to do with 2 things. It's either going to impact the way a process is executed, or it's going to impact a people piece, right? It's the way that someone goes about doing their daily task. And specifically for this WMS implementation with school specialty, we really honed in onto the last 2 bullet points. It was a new form of technology that required us to teach the leadership team and the end users how to adapt to it, a new business model. And then it was also a lot of educating them and doing research in terms of new roles and responsibility, and bringing the team along in terms of what does the current process look like, and then what does the future look like for these roles. So why is change management important, and how did change management play a successful factor in school specialty? Change management is important because it really allows an organization from the very beginning of a project to have a more structured approach in terms of the education piece and the journey of how to bring their team along. Instead of getting to the end of go live and then maybe having to work through some of those aches and pains as far as our end users aren't bought into the system, there's a lack of awareness, a lack of education in terms of the benefits of it, right? So if we do, the way that I like to look at it is, if organizations include change management at the very beginning of their project, it's definitely going to allow for more sustainable results towards the end and even post go live. So I think in essence, in the past, CEOs and executives used to think of change management as a nice to have, right? We know that budgets are important when it comes to projects like this, but nowadays it's really more of it's a need, right? It's not just a nice to have. We really need change management as we think about some of these implementations. So what's at stake with change, and what does success look like? Success specifically for school specialty looked like, from the very beginning, a change management plan that outlined key stakeholders that were going to have a seat at the table. So who's going to be impacted? How are they going to be impacted? And what is our plan to make sure that these folks are educated, they're trained, they have the proper communication from the very beginning of the project? And you're going to hear me say a lot in terms of I'm going to reference the phrase as far as bringing them along in the journey, right? And so really, it's stakeholder assessment just allows us to identify everyone who's going to be part of the project and have a good plan when it comes to the role they're going to play. Natalie talked a little bit about the core team, right? The core training teams, and the importance of having those defined early on, so that when we step out of the project post go live, that's really where the knowledge is going to live. And they're going to be the folks that are going to sustain the training, the change piece post go live. Assess future state for change planned. So this specifically happens when we look at our change management plans during 2 deliverables that we called out for school specialty. It was a change impact analysis, which really took a look at, all right, let's take a look at current processes. How do we do current processes in inbound? How many steps does it take to receive a trailer in? And what's the future process going to look like? What are those steps going to entail? And then, furthermore, again, that education plan to ensure that we had good plans in place to educate the inbound team that was going to be responsible for that area of the business. The risk and execution mitigation strategy comes down to, early in the project, defining the risk, the newness of the team, the turnover of the team. Do we have teams that are more, that speak a different language? How is the training going to be translated to them? All of those things we really like to uncover early on from a change management process, so that with the clients, mainly with a specific example with school specialty, we were able to sit down with them and define those risks, and then put the mitigation plans in place so that we were proactive as we trained, as we developed, and as we gave change training. The last two things on there is the engaged and trained teams, right? So when training teams are engaged and they are bought into an initiative, that initiative is more likely to live within them and is more likely to achieve that sustainability of implementation. And then that ROI is truly, how do we measure the benefits of change and the improvement and the adoption rate as we're rolling out our change management plan. So I would say the biggest call out for this one is really sitting down with the school specialty early on in the project and having those discussions to say, hey, what does success look like for you guys, right? At the end of the project, what is the story that we want to tell? How are we going to measure engagement? How are we going to pulse our team? What are roundtables going to look like? What are some of the avenues that you currently have to capture that insight? And then, do we need to take a look at maybe establishing a more solid structured engagement strategy as we go along the project? So on the flip side of things, when we talk a little bit about what is at risk with that OCM, right? So Natalie did, again, a great job at the very beginning, sharing with us a little bit of the background of school specialty. The first project did not have OCM. The second one did have OCM. And we were able to have really transparent conversations around both of those buildings, because the first building supported the second one. And so the leadership was just really open and transparent with us and said, hey, on the first project, it took us a while to adapt to the system. And it took us a while to adapt to the different changes, right? And so specifically, specifically for projects with WMS, we know that projects that don't include OCM at the very beginning sometimes have delayed and cost overturned. So it takes longer. Sometimes there's missed timelines just because there could be a lack of communication, a lack of execution in terms of understanding all the right players involved within the phases. Low morale and productivity. So lack of education can drive to just folks not understanding why there's so many people in our building and they're asking us questions about how we're doing processes, right? That's a good example that I like to use when we're on site to say, hey, how much does your team know about this project? What communication have we given them? And then if they tell me, okay, well, they really don't know too much, right? I think put yourself in their shoes. If you're a warehouse worker and all of a sudden you don't know about this project and you're seeing 10 people on the floor asking you questions about processes, that could be a major gap and a major miss, right? So that education is critical and important. The second area that I'll hone into is that that acronym of what's in it for me is huge. And it's a widely known concept within change management that we like to really leverage to say, okay, when we look at change, we really want to highlight the what's in it for me for supervisors. What are the benefits of a system and the changes that are going to be implemented? And how do we really rally around communicating those, right? And then likewise for end users, what are the changes? What's in it for them? Because at the end of the day, when we look at folks that have been in a role for 10, 20 years, ultimately, when we disrupt the way they do things, really what they want to know is how is this going to make my job easier? And how is this going to maybe impact the bottom line, right? Benefit our organization. And those are things that we really got to make sure that we get in front of early on in the project and communicate so that folks understand the benefits. The last piece on there, customer dissatisfaction, it's important to really communicate with our customers if they're going to see a change in, paperwork that's going to go out to them, or if for some reason there's going to be a change in delays, right? How do we get in front of the impact that it's going to cause our customers? And specifically with school specialty, we were able to bring them along and ensure that we highlighted those and we had clearer plans for a good transition closer to that go live. So, what does it all boil down to? In Alpine, one of the things that we do here is we leverage this OCM framework called the ADKAR model. And it's not just an Alpine framework that's used, it's a pretty widely industry change management strategy. And so we are certified as an Alpine team to leverage this through projects. And so specifically for WMS implementations, and we've also used this for labor management projects. So think of the ADKAR model as building blocks. They are building blocks that we start off with, and they are very aligned with project phases. And so the first building block is that awareness, creating the awareness of the project, the timelines, the benefits of it, right? The second piece is that desire, really digging into the culture of school specialty and assessing, okay, let's talk about your teams, right? If you have 60 team members in your building, we really sat down and used activities like the change curve to plug our folks in to see where they were at in terms of change. The knowledge and ability piece, I'll talk to those as like one whole, although they're different building blocks, because those mainly come to part when we start teaching more of that training piece in terms of training them in the system, training them in documentation, as well as continuing to train them in change. What does change mean? How do they adapt to it? What does being a change agent signify, and how can they really model the way for their teams? And then that last building block, the R, is kind of that solid building block that we focus on towards the end, which is that reinforcement. We're going to reinforce what we've taught you in the last couple of months and ensure that we review whether it's training, whether it's gaps, whether it's conducting analysis to ensure that the team feels extremely confident when we get ready to that go live piece, and then ensure that we have good plans to sustain that change. So not only do we really reinforce what we've taught, but then we start thinking about what does post-go live support look like for you as a team. And then this is kind of where we draw in that core team that we talked about, right? We start drawing them in and start kind of handing the baton to them and start ensuring that they feel confident to sustain what we've taught. So some more examples specifically to school specialty. On the screen, you guys will see the ADKAR model, and we just wanted to call out a couple of deliverables that we specifically achieved through the ADKAR model for school specialty, the second building. So we conducted a change assessment for them during the first phase of the awareness. The other deliverables that I'll call out is that stakeholder analysis. That's pretty important because again, better we can do as a team, collaboratively with our clients to establish everyone that's going to be impacted by the project, the better we are able to have plans to ensure that the right folks are involved during the different phases. And then I would say the other big one for us on the awareness area was that communication plan. The communication plan really consisted of assessing the current avenues that school specialty had to communicate, whether it was stand-up announcements, communication boards, roundtables, the director of the warehouse coming to morning stand-ups and giving engaging messaging. So all of those avenues, we were able to learn what their culture looked like and then tailor specific communication and feed different levels of information, whether it was to leadership, associates, leads, core teams. So that's pretty important because I would say that communication plan is one of the things that you see along every phase because it really kind of trickles down from the awareness to the desire. We'll continue that communication plan to knowledge and ability. We'll continue letting them know what training is going to look like, what changes to documentation is going to look like. And so that's pretty important. The other areas that as we hone into the next section, the desire piece, I think the change events are huge. So change events are something that we offer as part of our change management plan. And for school specialty, it really centered around 4 to 5 change management events that we have. So think of them as workshops where we worked with the leadership team to say, hey, talk to us about the strengths of your team, right? And then talk to us about a couple of areas that, as a leadership team, you guys would like to work on, whether it was communicate effectively, whether it was performance management, how do we motivate our teams, right? And then from there, I was able to tailor specific training to their leadership team and plan out these events over the next 3 to 4 months and bring the leadership team along as well as the director and assessing, hey, is your team getting better in this area? So those are huge, I would say, just because it really allows and equips leadership with the tools that they need to effectively lead through the change. The SWOT analysis is another, I would say, big activity for us that really benefits a team because it allows them to really dissect their operations. What are the strengths of your team? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities and the threats of your team? So we look at current state of your business, and then we really kind of approach this with the mentality of with WMS, right? Now that they've been educated in terms of what the future is going to look like with this new technology, let's talk about some of maybe the threats that you have, and then let's start putting plans together so that we have the right processes in place and the right actions to help the team navigate them. And then the SWOT analysis, very similar to the communication plan, is something that you see play out on the next phase because it's not just about, hey, we conducted the SWOT analysis, here you go, let's go ahead and save it in a SharePoint, right? It's truly a living document to say, all right, the first phase, we define what those were. The next phase in the knowledge piece, let's start tackling some of those actions. And let's start assessing, okay, how are we doing with what we've committed to and what we defined? And then the ability and knowledge piece really came with ensuring that our team was set up with strong training assessments, that they felt good with soft skill training, that they had the proper performance management training that they needed to coach their teams through performance, to motivate, to recognize their teams, and then to ensure that we had just a good, solid training plan that we were able to execute. That reinforcement section, the last area, a couple of things that we delivered to our school specialty client was a 30, 60, 90-day post implementation plan that specifically had training activities, OCM activities that they can continue to keep a pulse on. And then we also worked with their executive team to say, hey, now that we are closer to go live, let's talk about some of your routines. As an executive director, what do your routines look like? And how can you be really intentional when you're on the floor? Look for these areas, whether it was waste training, whether it was seeing their leaders really connect with their teams, whether it was understanding, hey, who are your top performers and how are we recognizing them for their efforts? Or where are the areas that you're struggling and how do we coach our team up? And then we kind of, tied the bow with that SWOT analysis. So if you remember, we talked a little bit about it. The SWOT analysis, we revisited and said, all right, now that we've gone live, let's take a look at the overall strengths of the project, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we use this as part of our closeout project, but it also encompasses change management and training.
Hey, Nidhi, I do think it's a good time. I have several questions in the chat. And so I'm going to pick a couple that I think we'll cover a few of them in future slides, but I'm going to pick a couple that I think will be really good. Teams too. Sure. I think I've got like 11 questions, so I won't hit you with all of them now. But I think a couple that might be good is, let me scroll back up. Which deliverables had the biggest impact on adoption? So if you think about even the deliverables that we share per ad car, which ones do you think that really helped the team adopt this change quicker?
Yeah, I would say, so first of all, I love the engagement. 11 questions is amazing. It just makes Natalie, Brenda, and I feel really excited that we're doing an okay job with this, you guys. All right. So I would say, the biggest one I would say from the very, and I think, during the phases, I think each deliverable plays a role, but I would say having a solid communication plan at the very beginning of the project is probably one of the most important ones, right? Because if you're a team, I mean, I always like to kind of tie the analogy. If you're a sports team, you always want to know the plays that you guys are running, right? And so it's critically important that we let our team know the plays that we're going to run phase by phase and we bring them along. So I would definitely say a solid communication plan is probably one of the most important ones.
Awesome. And then Natalie, I see that you answered it, but it was actually be a question that I was going to ask you is for school specialty specifically, what were the biggest surprises that we uncovered during the mock go live?
Yeah, so I'll just read what I wrote. I said in Site 1, we learned from the associates that mock go live was a major shock. So, in some of the lessons learned we did because we were going to be involved in Site 2, we gathered that info. And they said that they realized how much training was still needed for many of the users, that they hadn't accounted for the right users to get trained on the right topics. And they discovered that at their mock go live, which is right before go live. So they had to do a lot of retraining or on the job training. And then they also discovered a lot of design or process gaps that were missed because they didn't have the right stakeholders involved earlier in the project. So that may have caught some of those. But at Site 2, where we were involved, the biggest surprise that I recall was that certain areas of the building were having network issues that they didn't expect. And so comparatively, that's a pretty easy problem to solve. It's not a lot of sudden retraining. It's not redesigning a process. So it was a pretty good problem to have.
Well, I think you hit on a point that I think ties to this other question. So, in your opinion, which project phase tends to reveal gaps in ADKAR the fastest? So, meaning if we don't take this ADKAR approach and we don't use OCM methodologies, at what phase, whether it's design, test, validate, go live, do you tend to see those gaps?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
think,
Dee.
yeah, I'll answer and Natalie, you can tag on. I think that one like recent example that I can think of, I think of testing, where you think of like, okay, testing, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, is this person involved in testing? No. What role do they play, right? So it's that stakeholder analysis that could possibly have been missed at the very beginning of the project.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. I think that's the earliest thing that you would realize there's a problem. And testing is also where you would realize, oh, what about this process? What about this thing we do that, was never discussed in design right before testing because we didn't have the right people in the room. So I think you're totally right, Vidi. That stakeholder analysis is really called out when we get to the next phase.
I agree, and I think I would add that really you're identifying in the test phase, but what we really see is that it was a mess in the design phase. Like there was a requirement that wasn't fully defined, wasn't discussed, and it really has impacts on configuration and timeline at that point. So it is pretty impactful.
I think that's the overall theme is when OCM isn't involved early on, you don't see it in the moment, you see it in the next moment. And you have to somehow re-budget, re-time, retrain, redo. And not every project has the bandwidth to do that. So sometimes they just roll right through because they have other, business needs that they have to adhere to.
Yeah. And I think the other, like the last call out that I'll share is that, it's imperative that executives really get behind the importance of OCM, right? Because I think we've been on both sides where like sometimes an executive might not truly understand what change management means, right? And so if the vision is not set from top down to the bottom to the rest of the team, it's going to be really hard for the rest of the team to understand the importance of that change. However, we've also been on projects where the executives at the top right away at the discovery sessions, they're so excited about change management and they speak to, hey, this is going to be a big success factor for us. And those are the projects that I feel are definitely set up for success because the vision's already established from the very beginning of the project.
Okay. Awesome. I think we'll touch on some of the other questions as we go through the slides. So if not, I'll circle back and make sure to ask those.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so I think this next slide, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Natalie, and she's going to talk to us a little bit more about the results.
Yeah, so I saw somebody said that they're a WMS implementer. So if any of you have also ever been involved in a go live, you may have experienced some of these items in the first list here. And I know we at Alpine certainly have seen this. Unfortunately, at many go lives, you may see poor process adherence where end users don't understand why a process is the way it is, or they weren't involved early enough to get their buy-in on that change. So they resort to old methods of doing things, which can result in issues with inventory accuracy, can result in, system issues because the way that they used to do something has a different impact than what it happens today. And then second, unclear roles. If you've ever been on a warehouse floor during a go live, sometimes there's a sense of chaos when people aren't sure what they're supposed to be doing, or when one person assumes that another person is handling a certain task, and it turns out that those tasks are being missed because they're both assuming the other person is doing it. Also, we see that metrics are an afterthought. The day-to-day is focused on surviving the go live. That's a phrase I've heard before. And there's little time or energy spent measuring key performance indicators. And usually managers end up getting asked later in the week or maybe in week 2 by their superiors, how is it really going? We hear you saying today was hard, today was better, today was challenging. How do we know if it's good or bad against the measures that we're used to using in our daily operations? And then last is that software support can be overly involved, where the tech people, whether it's the original vendor or software integrator, are re-explaining how things work to end users. And we also see that sometimes they are relied on as kind of a personal assistant to a certain manager or a certain end user who needs a lot of support for basic functions that they've already been trained on. Of course, we're there for support and the tech team is there for support, but those are not the types of support that we should be focusing on at that point at a go live. So when Alpine gets involved in testing and training, it reduces a lot of these issues, but really the key activity which makes a difference in the go live experience, especially at School Specialties Site 2, was the OCM. At their go live, we saw the opposite of these concerns. We saw process adoption where end users were asking questions, but they were to each other, just a brief reminder, what button do I press here again? Or they would bring a unique situation to their supervisor, which indicates high trust and understanding of the processes. And also the technical support resources were more focused on data issues, not necessarily people or process issues. We saw people performing their jobs with little guidance, and we didn't really discover missed activities at the end of the day. We also looked back through the daily recaps from that project on week 1 of Go Live, and I just wanted to call out some really fantastic metrics here. First off, day 1, they noted that all associates were proficient in the system, meaning that no retraining was required. It's normal to have maybe some retraining. Everyone has different retention ability, but the fact that none of them needed it is pretty notable. As well as day 2, because of that, both the inbound and the outbound departments were able to begin cross-training. Usually we don't see that till much later. And then employee engagement also told a clear story. So on day 2, we took surveys as everybody was leaving the building each day, and it showed that 95% of the associates rated the Go Live experience as average or great, with a minority rating it as poor. And those individuals that rated it poorly were involved in a specific area of the building that had some technical issues. So it wasn't necessarily the approach to go live, more though the actual system challenges itself. So beyond our own testament of OCM's importance, you can see by these examples that by the end of the first week, the site had stabilized very quickly. Associates were confident in the system, and leadership had the visibility they needed to manage effectively. All right, so you've seen the specifics of how OCM affected school specialty. Now Viti is going to share some more on industry trends related to OCM.
Yeah, so when we talk about, overall industry, what in the industry specifically what supply chain is seeing with change management, I think I'm going to call out just a couple, I would say, of pretty notable facts that are on the slide. I think the first one is that 1 in 3 CEOs failed to achieve the desired outcome from past transformation initiatives. So you guys, this resonates just because we talked about how specifically the school specialty example, the first site didn't have OCM, the second one did, right? And I think as Alpine, we've also seen customers that we currently work with that say, hey, for the first project that we didn't have OCM. For this one, we want OCM just because we do feel that this was a big reason why we either struggled with the timeline, we struggled with adherence of the implementation. And so again, if we are able to really get our customers and our clients to understand the importance of the value of change management, it's going to create less pinpoints for them in the future if they include OCM from the very beginning. I would say the second one too is that 79.7% of people need to adapt their business every 2 to 3 years. So what does this mean? This means that change is not going to go away, right? We are human nature just lets us know that whether it's in our personal lives or in our work life, change is constantly happening. So the better we can be equipped to teach folks how to navigate change and how to really work through it and how to make sure that we engage folks, the better we're going to be positioned as an industry to achieve more solid results. And then I think the other ones that you see on the right side of the slide, a couple of things on there is that 87% or more of our workers view the improvement in technology skills important to their career advancements. So we talk a lot about the different generations that we currently have in our workforce, right? Whether it's, folks that have been enrolled for 20 years and really value what they do and hold near and dear that loyalty to the company, it's important for them to understand that organizations are investing, especially in the economy nowadays, right? Because it means growth, it means relevancy. I would say the other call out too is you have a lot of the newer generation, which looks for employers where they can grow. And it specifically looks for how are they being motivated? How are we motivating them? How are we engaging them, right? And what better way to engage them than to say, hey, we're spending the time to train you effectively in this new change. We're spending the time to bring you along, right? Not a lot of organizations are going to spend that time and the effort to say, we're going to pull you off the floor and we're going to teach you about change. And we're also going to, do activities, whether it's on the floor to ensure that you understand the importance of it. And then when it comes to that implementation, the really detailed plans around training, I think really resonates for them and lets them know that their organization really cares for them and that they're in a good place. And so I think with that, what we have on the next slide is some client perspective. I'm going to hand it over to Natalie and she's going to share a little bit more insight to this.
Yeah, so we did a case study on this second site, and we also got some information from Michael Harris, who is the director of that site. So in our case study, we mentioned about addressing both technical and human factors. Like VD said, change really comes in two forms. It's a process or a person change. And with a WMS, it's sometimes a mixture of both. I won't read, verbatim to you just so we have time to get some of the questions and you guys will be able to access this after as well. But something I wanted to call out was what Michael shared, which is we were able to get ahead of the growing pains of a new system. We showed the team from all levels in our warehouse that we were heavily invested in their success. That's really part of the buy-in that VD was just talking about across, generations, across experience levels. And then Michael's recommendation is there are many moving parts to a WMS implementation, as some of you probably know. Alpine supported us in the implementation in many different ways. And it gave us the ability to use our teams in other areas that needed to be ironed out to have a successful launch. He also, I appreciate this compliment. They learned our business like it was their own. That's really our goal when we come in so that we can be an effective partner to you all. We understand your process, your people, your culture, so we can pair not just the OCM offering, but the SIS or system implementation support where we provide direct technical experience of here's how you build a training plan, here's how you build a testing plan, here's the best practices of doing those activities, plus weaving in the OCM there.
Thanks, Natalie. I think I do want to highlight, something on his first comment there where he said we were able to get ahead of it, right? I think what's most impressive is that, we weren't starting at ground zero. We were almost starting negative because site 2 had probably already heard about the concerns about site 1, right? And so I just want to call and highlight that it's never too late to pause and figure out where did we not take the right OCM approach? How do we apply it to either halfway between the project or maybe even after the project is done to come back and really make sure that everyone is on board, because continuing to fight that resistance isn't going to get you anywhere, right? So I thought it was really definitely kudos to BD and you and the team for being able to understand the challenges that we had on site 1 and make sure that site 2 was excited about this change. All right, with that, I do have a couple of questions here. Let's see. So specifically for the benefits at school specialty, were supervisors and associates able to clearly answer the what's in it for me once OCM was in place? And if so, what benefits did they point out?
Yeah, definitely. So I think from a leadership standpoint, they were, right? And I think for me, when I met with them and I was able to go through those change events, it was something that at the very beginning, change one, it's sometimes very typical for your leadership to be a little bit more timid and maybe not as vocal, right? So it was a lot of me asking them questions, bringing them out, quizzing them on what are the benefits of the system, what do you know, what don't you know, right? And then just having dialogue and conversation. Having dialogue and conversation and getting them to be really open to what are your concerns, what questions do you guys have, and then slowly working them towards that what's in it for me benefit, right? So it's important that we're transparent too as we talk about the change, right? Because we don't want to come across as like the first approach that what's in it for me. So that first phase of change really it focuses on getting concerns out and getting folks, whether it's end users, associates, or leadership team, to really be honest and transparent about the change. Tell me how you really feel about it, right? And then once we understand how they truly feel, then it's starting to kind of understand what are the changes and how is this going to benefit you. In terms of, from a leadership standpoint, it was a lot around visibility. You know, with the new WMS, you have more visibility to your business. So you no longer have to maybe do after the fact reports where you might have to like figure out how was yesterday, right? Or how does production look? You can make more real-time moves. And so that was a big one. I would say they were able to definitely say, hey, what's in it for me? We have more visibility to that piece of our business. I think the other piece from a end user standpoint, the what's in it for me, had to do around a lot of transitioning from tribal knowledge in terms of them having to say, okay, I have to go through 5 steps and there's no SOP. So maybe if you approach 5 people, they might go about the same task differently. With new WMS system, usually it's like they don't have an option because the system's going to guide them to the next step, right? So I think at first it was like, okay, this is a change. We're not used to this. Normally, this is how we've done things. And then it was like, we're done. It was 2 clicks. Natalie, you only train, like this option is only going to take 2 clicks and then we're done with this function. Yep, that's as easy as it is, right? So I think slowly during the different phases, we were able to kind of say, do you understand the benefits in terms of how this is going to help you? And so I think they were definitely able to speak to it and testify to it.
Thank you. And then other one, looking back, what single benefit from OCM at school specialty would you say was had the most long-term impact? Speed, cost control, or culture?
I would definitely say culture. I think culture, just because again, you made a pretty valid point where you said, hey, they heard horror stories from the first building, right? In terms of whether it was how long it took them to adapt to the system or just not being very effective at the very beginning. And so culturally, I think it helped that the team was really honest and transparent with us, and they were honest and transparent with themselves as a leadership team. And then I think one thing that I'll definitely highlight that I feel that they did amazing was they were also really transparent with their associates. And you can tell when we did the kickoff meetings, like the directors got in front of them and said, hey, we know you've heard about our first implementation. It doesn't feel good to be up here and let you guys know that it took us extra time. Here's where we missed it. We're still not performing, but here's what we're going to do for the second implementation that's going to help. So I would say culture is a huge one, because the more you could be honest and transparent with your team and just let them know, hey, we want us to win as a team, I think the more on board they understand that it's not just about the bottom line, but it's truly about how are you setting them up for success.
Thank you. Let's see. This one, and I think maybe this one could be not only just this school specialty project, but just based on your experience. What advice would you give to organizations about preparing their teams to handle stress and burnout during these large-scale changes?
I can speak to that one. I have been involved in several multi-site rollout projects, some of them lasting multiple years, some of them lasting, dozens of sites. And a lot of times an approach that's used is kind of a core team that travels to each of these, because they can take the knowledge from the beginning of the project all the way through the end, which is wonderful for retention and like longevity, but at the same time, we're also human beings, and not every human being likes to travel week after week after week. So, some of the things that I think really help balance that is to first identify a backup team that can fill in during certain periods of the project. Maybe if you have 10 sites that are going to go live, you alternate which teams are going, and one of them they're going to support remotely, and the other one's going to be on site. Maybe you switch up the mixture of the teams so that someone's traveling a few weeks and then they have a few weeks off. Another one is to really recognize them. You can choose many incentives. It could be t-shirts that they all get. It could be, treats out to dinner that are at a really nice restaurant while they're going out and about. It could be scheduling a realistic plan for them in advance and making sure that your on-site support makes sense. So instead of having all 5 people that are going to a site to support there from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., you can stagger it and say, okay, person A, you're going to sleep in today. The other person's going to cover shift 1. So it of course depends, as everything does. It always depends. But all those details are what really bring it into balance when we talk about work-life balance. There's even a work-work balance. Okay, when I'm on site, how am I going to make sure I have some time to eat something? How am I going to make sure I have time for a mental break so I can be of the best support to whoever I'm helping?
Awesome. No, great call out, Natalie. And I think as you were talking, I was thinking through at Alpine, anytime that we go into these, WMS implementation projects, we know that they're going to be long, 9 to 12-month projects. There's going to be a lot of people involved. They're costly as well too. And so we always tell our clients, you have to plan for contingency, right? And so, and I think that applies not only to from a budget perspective, make sure that you have contingency because things might take a little bit longer than you expected. There might be a modification that you weren't planning on that just is necessary in order for the system to work. But I think you also, to your point, need to have contingency in terms of people, right? Like, don't wait until that person quits for you to then say, oh, I can have someone else do it. Like, staying close to your team and understanding when they are getting close to burnout is just important, and offering that balance well before they get to the point where they no longer want to be part of the project, right? And I think Didi talked about it earlier too, but you talked about like showing them the place, right? And making sure that communication is really important. I think it's really important not only for the actual team that's going to be using the new software in terms of the actual software, but also very important for the project team, right? So showing them, here is 12 months, here's what we're going to accomplish for 12 months, and telling them from the very beginning, like I know Natalie already knows when's testing going to happen, because I know that's when I'm going to be like fully engaged. It's going to be long days, long hours, and I need to be mentally prepared for that. It's not 12 months, but I know for 4 to 6 weeks, testing is critical. We have to put our head down, and then I'm going to get a couple of weeks to come back, decompress, and then go back for training, right? So like really showing them the different phases throughout the project and when they're going to have to be fully engaged and active, and allowing them to, one, mentally prepare, and two, prepare whether they need to like offload some of their day-to-day activities is also really important. Something that I would call out. Awesome. All right, I think, let's see, maybe we have time for one more question, and then we can finish a little early, it might be. When running, this is an interesting one because we've actually, I know personally from a client perspective, we always ask the question around learning management systems. And so I'm curious to get both of your perspectives on this. So when you're running a WMS project with a strong OCM focus, how do you see the learning management system supporting adoption? As it mainly about scalable training delivery, so you can train more people quicker using an LMS, or do you use LMS data to measure readiness and reinforcement after go live?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's understanding what current LMS systems in place, right? Because there are organizations that have really extensive ones, and then there are organizations that are barely developing. So first understand what they have in place, and then also understand maybe what their future looks like. And then letting them know, hey, with WMS, here are the things that you're going to have at your disposal. Do you need to make changes to it? But I would definitely say it's that alignment, because for the most part, whatever training that we offer, we want them to transition it to their LMS. And that's normally how we work with clients, where they go ahead and store it in their LMS, and then they'll use the training teams, the core teams will use that. So it is a little bit of scalability in terms of, will they be able to scale to what changes are going to come forth in the future?
Yep. I would also add that if they don't have an LMS, because not every client does, that's usually a separate type of project if they want to, start using a learning management system. But if they don't have one, we do provide recommendations on, okay, here's how you can leverage maybe SharePoint to store things and access and team, like, different ways of controlling the documents that we're making with you, controlling the training and tracking the training that people need and are getting. And then once they've gotten it, so you have clear visibility. So if they don't have an LMS or an established way of delivering and tracking training, we do have, kind of make it from home, but at the most professional as possible. We have our own versions of that we can help implement for the purpose of the implementation project. And then they can use those in the meantime after the project until they, potentially progress to an LMS.
Yeah, I guess to your point, Natalie, what I would call out there is that it's almost separate. So like if you already have an LMS, it's going to make your training that much more efficient because you'll have a process already as to where you're going to store it, who's going to own updating it. If you have new employees, how are you going to leverage it and how are you going to deliver it? If you don't have an LMS, you still have to answer all of those process questions. You're just probably going to use something that maybe isn't as efficient. So you're going to have to use SharePoint. You're going to make sure that you clearly outline who's going to update these documents, what cadence are they going to get updated and etc. But what I will call out to your point is if you don't have an LMS already, like we highly suggest that you are very cautious about during an LMS implementation at the same time that you're doing a WMS implementation, because it is a change, right? So now we're layering one change on top of another change, and some organizations might be able to, and equipped to handle that, right? But we just talked about team burned out and like everything that goes along with a WMS implementation. And so I would say if you don't currently have one, it's not critical in order for the WMS to be successful. I would just like highly suggest that you are very cautious about doing two changes at the same time.
Yeah, good call.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's really kind of the questions that we had. We did have a couple of nice comments though. So I did want to make sure to share them with you guys. One, someone said, this is really helpful insight and that it is interesting to see Site 1 showed that even though you had the right places in place, right? Design, testing, etc., success wasn't guaranteed without OCM to drive adoption and sustainment. So, and then someone else said love. So that's appreciated.
That's sweet.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for your time today. We do have another webinar coming up. We'd love for you guys to join us and register. October 22nd, we'll be talking about unlocking efficiency, the power of slotting in your warehouse. So hope you've enjoyed the webinar today, and we appreciate all the questions and engagement. Thanks everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you. Bye.